before talking to allow the system to pick up. Please speak loudly and clearly so that your video feed will be on throughout the proceeding. If you forget to mute and you are not speaking, I or one of the co-hosts will mute you. I will not unmute you, so please remember to unmute when it is your turn. Once I finish this introduction, I will double check to make sure that everyone is muted. It will be silent for everyone on the WebEx until Chair Pingree gavels on the meeting. If anyone has any questions, Chair Pingree, you may begin the countdown.
Thank you. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good morning. This hearing will now come to order. As the hearing is fully virtual, we must address a few housekeeping matters. For today's meeting, the chair or the staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition for the purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If you notice that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, the staff will unmute your microphone. I remind all members and witnesses that the 5-minute clock still applies. If there's a technology issue, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. You will notice a clock on your screen that will show how much time is remaining. At 1 minute remaining, the clock will turn to yellow. At 30 seconds remaining, I will gently tap the gavel to remind members that their time is almost expired. When your time is expired, the clock will turn red, and I will begin to recognize the next member. In terms of the speaking order, we will follow the order set forth in the House rules, beginning with the chair and ranking member. Then members present at the time the hearing is called to order will be recognized in order of seniority. And finally, members not present at the time of the hearing is called to order. Finally, House rules require me to remind you that we have set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or markups. That email address has been provided in advance to your staff. Okay, that is the end of the technical part. So let us go ahead and start our hearing. I am so excited to welcome Secretary Deb Holland to her first hearing since being confirmed as the 54th Secretary of the Interior and the first ever Native American to serve as a cabinet secretary. We are all very happy to congratulate our former colleague on assuming this important new role. And we are really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the fiscal year 2022 budget request for the Department of Interior and other initiatives that the President has introduced. I want to mention that joining the Secretary is Rachel Taylor, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Policy, Management, and Budget. So just to note for our colleagues on the committee, Ms. Taylor was the Senate Appropriations Clerk for the Interior Subcommittee. And of course, as appropriators, we think that was an excellent move that Interior appointed her to this important position. So thank you so much and welcome, Rachel. Today's hearing will primarily focus on the President's fiscal year 2022 budget request for the Department of the Interior. As we all know, the administration is still developing their full request, but this budget blueprint makes it clear that President Biden is committed to long overdue investments in being good stewards of our planet and fighting the climate crisis. I'm very encouraged about what's been outlined, specifically the return of science as the foundation for decision-making, the focus on climate change and maintaining healthy ecosystems, all through the lens of environmental justice. I'm also heartened by the executive orders and the American Jobs Plan that the President has initiated. From my perspective, this budget is a refreshing change from the draconian budgets the committee has received over the last 4 years. I'm looking forward to learning more details about how the department plans to get us back on the right track and to advance the important work of being a good steward of our nation's natural and cultural resources for future generations. I'm also interested in how you will strengthen collaboration across the Interior's bureaus and with other federal agencies, NGOs, and stakeholders. We recognize the interrelatedness between health and well-being of our species and habitats, the impact that anthropogenic actions have on clean air and clean water, the need to preserve biodiversity, and the other important ecosystem services we rely upon to ensure the economic prosperity and the American public's health and well-being. The President has laid out an ambitious agenda, and I hope today's discussion will be an opportunity to discuss the goals and objectives that you have established for the department to support that agenda. I would now like to yield to our ranking member, Mr. Joyce, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Had to find that magic arrow to unmute. It's truly a privilege to join you in welcoming our distinguished witness, a former colleague, member of the Pueblo of Laguna, and 54th Secretary of the Interior, the Honorable Deb Holland. For many of us on the subcommittee dedicated to upholding the federal government's trust and treaty responsibilities to Native American tribes, today is a special day. So glad to have you here. Let me extend a warm welcome to your Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, Ms. Rachel Taylor. Ms. Taylor is a highly respected former staffer to the Senate Interior's Appropriations Subcommittee with a knack for finding bipartisan solutions to problems. Welcome. Secretary Holland, conserving our nation's natural resources, preserving our diverse cultural heritage, and upholding our trust responsibilities are goals we all share. While we will disagree on many of the details, we remain united in pursuit of these goals. May we begin this new working relationship united in the recognition of this shared commitment. And our disagreements are amplified in the media and threaten to divide us. I hope we can remember that we are in this together, and only that working together can we achieve long-lasting solutions. We worked well together during your time in Congress, and I'm committed to continue to doing so. You've already begun to demonstrate the same commitment to me and my Republican colleagues here today, and I want to thank you for that. Former Interior Secretary Gail Norton recently said, "Every Interior Secretary takes office, I want to do more for Indian country." And every Interior Secretary leaves office saying, "I wish I'd been able to do more for Indian country." I'm not sure yet that the same holds true for the, I'm not sure yet, but as I imagine, the same holds true for those who have left the gavel of the subcommittee. But because the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights has reported, there's so much more to do. Madam Secretary, your proposal for the $600 million increase certainly does more, and I'm guessing you would have done even more if you could have. Still, I think it's fair that you will find several of us on the subcommittee are willing partners to follow your lead in Indian country. I think that what Secretary Norton was saying, though, is that the Interior Department, like the subcommittee, faces the reality of budget allocations handed down from above that force us to make choices with finite funding. Lately, the federal government has been spending money it does not have at such a rapid clip that I fear finite funding may lose its meaning. Though much of it was justified to overcome the pandemic and subsequent economic devastation, my concern is that the spending has gotten so out of hand that people will begin to think it's normal. As we continue to restore our way of life and reignite our economy, it's imperative that the federal government finds a way to live within its means so that we do not have to saddle future generations with even more economic burden than what already awaits them. To do that, this Congress and this President must return to the practice of evaluating and funding programs based on their performance. And we must be willing to make the difficult but responsible choices as stewards of taxpayer dollars. The initial fiscal 22 Department of 22 Department of Interior budget proposal before us today is $17.4 billion, a $2.4 billion or 16.3% increase. Because the administration has not yet released a comprehensive request, there's no indication of any program evaluations or offsets, and it's unclear how much of the department's $17.4 billion proposal is within this subcommittee's jurisdiction. In the absence of the budget details, today's discussion will instead likely focus on the department's policies, so let me take a moment to focus on a few. Thursday marks another Earth Day. I count myself among Leader McCarthy and other many House Republicans who recognize that human activity is contributing to the changing climate. I believe we should be doing everything we can to help bring our constituents mitigate climate risk in their everyday lives while we pursue realistic, free market, and innovative solutions to climate change that protect the interests of the American people and our communities and our country's economic well-being. The U.S. and most of the world are dependent upon fossil energy for the foreseeable future, whether people like it or not. So I urge you not to lock America out from the domestic energy and minerals it needs for a smooth transition to a cleaner energy future. Top-down policies that force hardship on Americans never works when the costs outweigh the benefits in their everyday lives. And we need only to look at the pandemic for recent examples. The president set a goal to encourage broad participation in conserving at least 30% of our lands and waters by 2030. I'm concerned by what I'm hearing from outside interests about locking up federal lands from sustainable, responsible use. I'm also concerned that a singular focus on acreage shifts the conversation to open lands out west and misses the broader point. all of us can participate in conservation. Programs like Homegrown National Park and others show that an increasing number of people in urban and suburban areas want to be part of the solution. I urge you to invite them into the 30 by 30 initiative. Finally, in Northeast Ohio, the Great Lakes are our lifeblood. From preventing the spread of invasive carp to preventing harmful algal blooms to restoring resilient coastal habitats, there are several important programs within your purview that are of vital importance to my district. I hope we can work on these together. I invite you to come visit and see how these programs are making a difference. Thank you again for being here today, Secretary Holland. I look forward to our discussion, and I also want to pass on greetings from Representative Davis, who I had breakfast with this morning, who also said that he is honored that you are in your position as secretary. And with that, thank you, Chair Pingree. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Joyce. And I would now love to recognize Secretary Holland for her opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Chair Pingree, Ranking Member Joyce, members of the subcommittee. It's an honor and privilege for me to be here with you today on behalf of the Department of the Interior. It is deeply meaningful for me as the first Native American Cabinet Secretary to be here on the ancestral homelands of the Anacostan and Piscataway people, speaking before this subcommittee. It also means a tremendous amount to me that the first hearing since my confirmation is before you, my former colleagues from the House of Representatives. I understand the important role that all of you play in the success of the Department of the Interior and our many programs. I want to particularly recognize the work that you have done on a bipartisan basis to lead the way on priorities like the Great American Outdoors Act and funding tribal programs. Your leadership has made a real difference in the lives of Native Americans and Alaska Natives in communities across our country. I'm here today to roll up my sleeves to work with you as a partner now on this side of the legislative process and help to build upon your passion and hard work. I want us to work together to make sure that the department is ready to meet the challenges we have in front of us, like the existential threat of climate change and the effects it has on our country. The President has laid out a clear vision for a whole-of-government approach to addressing the ongoing climate crisis and challenged the department to play a leadership role in meeting this moment. On Friday, I issued 2 secretarial orders, one to prioritize action on climate change and establish a departmental climate task force, the other to rescind a number of policies from the previous administration that favored energy production at the expense of other priorities. My hope is that these orders will begin to restore balance to how the department makes land management decisions, elevate the role of science, and reaffirm the importance of stakeholder engagement and environmental justice. Addressing the climate crisis is also a recurrent theme in the President's discretionary request for 2022. The budget before the subcommittee today reflects the President's ambitious vision to lift up the nation in this unprecedented time. By addressing the climate crisis, we will provide much needed resources to tribal nations, invest in conservation of public lands and waters, advance environmental justice, recognize the important role of science, and chart a path toward a clean energy future for all Americans. The President's 2022 budget request proposes a total of $17.4 billion for the Department of the Interior, a $2.4 billion or 16% increase above current funding levels. Specifically, the President's proposal invests in America with $4 billion, a $600 million increase to honor and strengthen our commitments to tribal nations, more than $450 million to remediate orphaned oil and gas wells and reclaim abandoned mines on federal and non-federal lands, bringing thousands of jobs to communities across the country. Investments to promote racial justice and equity in underserved communities, including a National Park Service Voting Rights Center project at the Selma Interpretive Center, honoring the legacy of civil rights leaders, including the late dear Representative John Lewis. A $550 million increase to accelerate clean energy deployment and expand climate adaptation and ecosystem resilience on our public lands, $200 million in climate-related science to better understand climate impacts and how best to mitigate, adapt, and increase resilience in our communities. A $200 million increase for science-driven conservation to manage the nation's natural resources in line with America's climate, biodiversity, and clean energy needs, and a $100 million increase to address the growing threat of wildfire through our hazardous fuels and burned area rehabilitation programs, which is especially important as we face drought in the West like we will during this fire season. Complementing this request is the American Jobs Plan, a longer-term strategy to create millions of good-paying jobs, rebuild our country's infrastructure, and position America to outcompete others on the global stage. We must use every lever at our disposal to make necessary progress. This nation has the opportunity of a lifetime to strengthen our country, fight climate change, and improve our way of life for generations to come. To build back better, we need both a strong annual budget for the department and the President's Jobs Plan. I look forward to working with each of you to achieve these important goals. I commit to you that I will continue to honor and respect the role of this subcommittee with a confident expectation that working together, we can accomplish great things on behalf of the American people. And just like you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Joyce, I'm pleased to be joined this morning by Rachel Taylor, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Policy Management and Budget. She is here to help out with some details if necessary. This concludes my opening remarks. Thank you again for having me, and I am very happy to answer any questions that any of you have.
Well, thank you so much, Madam Secretary. We're so pleased to have both of you in front of our committee, and thank you for your opening remarks. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes to begin the questions. I just want to reiterate, we are so pleased to have you in this role, and we are really looking forward as a committee in a bipartisan way working together with you in this partnership. So this relationship between the committee and your department is a high priority for us, and thank you for being with us today. I'm going to dig in on biodiversity and climate change and let you talk a little bit more about that. You have certainly taken on an awesome responsibility at a very challenging time for our country and for our planet. And we know the enormous challenges that are confronting us with climate change, the impact on our air, our water, our land, and our communities in particular, and that there is a lot of work to be done. I've also been very concerned and frankly just shocked when I read the May 2019 United Nations report about the decline in species, over 1 million species facing extinction. Scientists have also told us that 2.9 billion birds have been lost over the past 5 decades. I know that the president's budget includes another $550 million over the 2021 enacted level to decrease pollution, accelerate clean energy development, expand efforts around climate adaptation, and ecosystem resilience. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about the work that you intend to do to protect and sustain biodiversity on our public lands, to mitigate for those changes, and also how you're thinking about an inclusive, equitable climate and conservation agenda. So that's a lot of stuff to cover, but hold forth.
Thank you, Chairwoman. And absolutely, this problem is big. It is so big that it's going to take a lot of different programs and tools and everything to tackle it. And I think that it would be an important investment in the long-term resilience of our economy and well-being for communities across the country. Basically, we know that we need to strengthen the health and resilience of our land, water, and ecosystems, the habitats that those species that you're talking about rely on. That is absolutely important. With drought in the West, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, some of those habitats are disappearing as we speak. So we're working hard to deploy clean energy alternatives. The president's plan to create jobs through the Conservation Climate Corps will be an amazing opportunity for folks to sort of enter this space if they haven't had opportunities of that before. Creating, generations to come, we're creating folks who will care about our environment and carry this work on into the future. And the big investments in science, applying science to help communities plan and respond to drought, floods, extreme weather, and all of those issues. A proactive forest and rangeland management program to reduce the wildfire risk is also in the plans. And wildfire, of course, in and of itself destroys that habitat again. So we have many opportunities with the budget, with the President's jobs plan to make these things a reality, and we're going to get to work to make sure that it happens. And of course, always happy to continue this conversation with you anytime.
Great, thank you. I think this will be an ongoing conversation as we tackle the budget for these many important issues. Last week, you issued a secretarial order establishing a climate task force, which seems like an important component. How do you envision the task force operating? How's it going to help the department to meet its commitments under the executive order that the president signed? Can you tell us a little more about that?
Of course. Well, I mean, part of the president's priorities since he came into office is an all-of-government approach. Yes, the DOI has important obligations to our climate, to our land and waters, but we also feel that many other departments can do their part in ensuring this. So we'll be happy to have more conversations with you about that as well, but I think it's an exciting time in this administration to put priorities like climate and science at the top.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. I'll yield back the small balance of my time and happy to recognize Ranking Member Joyce for 5 minutes for his questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a former prosecutor and co-founder of the Bipartisan Task Force to End Sexual Violence, I'm encouraged by your recent announcement to form a new unit within the Bureau of Indian Affairs Office of Justice Services to provide leadership and direction for work involving missing and murdered American Indians and Alaska Natives. While serving in the House, you provided the task force with critical insight on steps Congress should take to address the persistently high rates of violence experienced by Native women and men. I was also proud to co-sponsor your legislation, the Not Invisible Act, during the 116th Congress. That bill, now law, increases the coordination of efforts to reduce violent crime within Indian lands and against Indians. Under the bill, the department must designate an official within the Bureau of Indian Affairs to coordinate prevention efforts, grants, and programs related to missing Indians and the murder and human trafficking of Indians. I'm pleased to see that you continue doing this important work at the department, given it remains a shared priority, and this subcommittee has been supporting the Operation Lady Justice initiative started during the previous administration. What parts of the Operation Lady Justice have been working well, and where do you see room for improvement that will lead you to establishing this new unit?
Thank you, Ranking Member Joyce, and thank you so much for your attention, and I'm grateful for the support that you gave me on this issue when I was in Congress, and I know that your experience can help us to move forward in this space. Operation Lady Justice, of course, it turned attention to this important program, and there's been a lot of engagement across the government. We felt very that it was important for this unit to provide the leadership that it needs so that everyone is moving in the same direction. The new unit will improve coordination within and outside of the BIA to make sure that we're not missing anything, that we are just, making a bigger tent to ensure that we're not missing a thing on this issue. As you know, this is an issue that's been going on for 500 years since Europeans came to this continent. And I think that it's going to take a lot more effort. We've started to scratch the surface and we'll continue in that direction. And so thank you again for your support.
Thank you. What is the proposed FY22 budget for this work? And are there other pieces in the FBI or other agencies budgets that we should be funding to help you succeed?
Well, I know that when Operation Lady Justice was first created, there was a $1 million budget, and I believe we're increasing that to $6 million. We'll absolutely get you all the details you would like for the record and whenever you would like it. Yes, I feel like with that added, with the added budget and the leadership of the justice services, that we'll be able to make some inroads and really make a difference for communities across the country.
That's great. Another question, the opioid epidemic has been affecting every person and households across the country, and the COVID-19 pandemic has made the situation worse, unfortunately. And that's why Representative Kilmer and I are working hard together this year to pass our bill, HR 654, the Drug-Free Communities Pandemic Relief Act. The situation is perhaps more dire in Indian country than anywhere else, which is why the subcommittee has strongly supported the department's joint opioid reduction task force, begun under the previous administration and led by the BIA. Last year, the task force had led 14 operations across 7 states, resulting in more than 313 arrests and seizure of 2,600 pounds of illegal narcotics with an estimated street value of near 20 million, more than double the price tag from the previous year. Do you intend to keep the task force going during your tenure? And if so, what additional resources are needed to build on last year's success?
Absolutely. The task force is, of course, it's part of the government-wide efforts targeting this problem. And we know that in terms of successes, that the BIA's K-9 teams, for example, have been very effective in disrupting drug trafficking routes. We are going to keep up the work on this issue and appreciate your support on that as well. So yes, this terrible problem continues to plague our community. So we'll keep building on the efforts of the task force and make sure that we're doing everything we need to.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And Madam Chair, I've got nothing to yield back.
But you timed that so exquisitely well, just to the last second. So I'm pleased to recognize Representative Kilmer for his 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being with us today, and congratulations on your confirmation. It's a humbling moment to recognize our nation's first Native American Secretary of the Interior, and someone many of us are pleased to and proud to consider a friend. It should come as no surprise that I want to touch on a subject that I know we share a deep commitment to, and that is ensuring that the federal government finally fulfills its unmet treaty and trust responsibilities to Native American communities. I am so grateful for your longstanding partnership on advancing this essential priority, certainly as my colleague in the House and throughout your leadership as the former co-chair of the Congressional Native American Caucus, and I know this will remain a key priority for you in your new role. As you know, in 2003, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights issued a report titled "A Quiet Crisis, Federal Funding, and Unmet Needs in Indian Country" that documented the failures and outlined clear actions the federal government needs to take in order to meet its obligations. In 2015, I led an effort in Congress, along with several of my colleagues on this subcommittee, to call on the Commission on Civil Rights to publish an update to this report to determine whether any progress had actually been made. And 3 years later, the Commission published its update, and to ensure that there was no confusion about their findings, they titled the report "Broken Promises: Continuing Federal Funding Shortfall for Native Americans." Indefensibly, almost nothing had changed. When the Broken Promises report was published, I made a commitment to then President Fawn Sharp of the Quinault Indian Nation, who first drew my attention to the Quiet Crisis report and called for leadership in updating this report, as well as the 10 other tribal leaders that I have the honor of representing, that I would not let those recommendations fall on deaf ears again. In my view, Congress has a moral and a legal obligation to fulfill the promises made to Indian country, and I'm so grateful for your shared commitment to achieving that goal. In fact, my colleague, Representative Simpson, and I led a letter signed by many of the members sitting here today to President Biden last month, calling on him to ensure his fiscal year 2022 budget reflected these priorities, and I'm encouraged to see that the president's budget blueprint includes $4 billion and more than $600 million increase over current levels to honor our nation's commitment to Native American communities. But I know the decades-long pattern of systemic funding shortfalls outlined by the Commission on Civil Rights can't be resolved in a single fiscal year. So I'd love to hear from you, one, about how your agency and the Biden administration plan to work with Congress toward fulfilling these long overdue promises. And two, I'm especially eager to hear how your agency will support tribal efforts to combat the growing threat caused by climate change, including sea level rise and more frequent and severe coastal hazards, which are already forcing many tribes, certainly in my region, to abandon sacred sites and homelands that they've occupied since time immemorial in order to move to higher ground.
Thank you so much, Congressman, and I appreciate you championing these issues for such a long time. It means a tremendous amount to me personally as well. So yes, more than $600 million increase to uphold U.S. treaty and trust responsibility and to empower tribal nations to govern their own communities. I think one of the biggest issues or priorities of President Biden is his priority to ensure that tribal consultation is an all-of-government approach. It's not checking the box. It's not, texting a tribal leader 2 hours before a big decision is made. It's sitting down. It's meeting them in their space to make sure that we are talking about the issues that they care about. And there's no other way to do this than to truly engage. And I'm very proud to be a part of this administration who has made that commitment to Indian country like never before. And I feel very confident that if we are talking to tribes, if we're talking to them about sacred sites, about funding, about education and healthcare and broadband internet service and water, for heaven's sake, running water to some of these places, that there's no doubt we are going to know fully what Indian country needs to move forward. They deserve opportunities like every community in this country, and we're committed to that. So I appreciate you and the work you've done, and we realize that it's not just going to be one administration that essentially, cures this issue once and for all, but we're going to do our best to make sure that we document what it is that tribes need and move in that direction and move in that direction for a very long time. So we're going to do our best.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. I'm pleased to recognize Mr. Simpson for 5 minutes for his questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I had to jump out of my chair there to get ready for this. Madam Secretary, thank you for being here today, and thank you for our conversation that we had yesterday. I find that there are many things that we agree with, and we'll work together in harmony, trying to enact, whether it's, as you've heard, this committee's commitment to trying to meet our treaty obligations with our Indian brothers and sisters, whether it's on Indian health services or Indian education or tribal justice. This committee has worked in a bipartisan fashion, regardless of the chairman, over the last, as long as I've been on this committee now, I guess for 20 years, 21 years, something like that. We've worked in a bipartisan fashion, as I said, and I look forward to working with you on those issues. Also, the Great American Outdoors Act, the implementation of that act. We've talked about wildfires and the need to try to reduce these rangeland wildfires that are the biggest threat to sage-grouse habitat in the West, and as well as giving the 11 states in the West the chance to have their conservation plans work with sage-grouse. They are working with sage-grouse and trying to prevent the listing of that, because the states want sage-grouse not to be listed and to be healthy populations as much as anybody does. So working with the states and the private landowners is very important. But much of the conversation that we've had so far has been on climate change. Mm-hmm. And rightfully so. Something I agree with, something that needs to be addressed, that we've been working on for a number of years. But there are, and you mentioned, it will direct our land management decisions and decisions we make in this department. One of the things that hasn't been talked about when we talk about climate change is this, and I'm going to bring this up. I apologize for not having brought it up yesterday when we had our conversation, and maybe you'll want to comment on it, or maybe it's something that you'll take for advice and we can work on together. But I look forward to working with you on this, and that is the fact that as we move toward a greener economy, if you will, bringing in or reducing our dependence on fossil and fossil fuels, and moving to things like solar and wind and battery technologies and so forth, as we green our economy and try to reduce carbon emissions. It also brings up some challenges, and one of those that I've been studying over the last while is the fact that these new technologies require access to critical minerals and rare earths. The fact that we import many, in fact, far too many of our rare earth and critical minerals from sources overseas, and oftentimes from countries that don't really care for us. That we are trade advisor, there are trade adversaries, and as well as other. But these rare earths and critical minerals are vital to our national defense, as well as greening this economy. We have sufficient supplies of these rare earths in the United States. But unfortunately, because of restrictions making it difficult to get permitting for mining some of these resources, we've made it almost impossible to access these minerals in the United States, and consequently, we're dependent on foreign countries for supplying a lot of these critical materials. I want to work with you to make sure that we can improve our access on our public lands, because with the federal estate and the millions of acres that you're going to be managing, many of those rare earths are found on federal lands. But to make sure that we do it in an environmentally responsible manner. When you talk about mining, you know, everybody kind of goes, oh, mining, not a good thing. We've kind of gotten away from it in the United States. I would tell you that it's vitally important economically to this country. And so you can, you know, the old days of mining where you take a fire hose and blow away the side of a mountain and then sort out the minerals, those are gone. Mining today is much different than it was in years past. We can do it environmentally safely, but we have to have access to some of those mineral deposits in this country and on our federal lands. So that's an issue I want to work with you on, to make sure that we can improve our mining laws and our permitting access for mining to access these critical minerals that are going to be that are going to be critical as we move into a greener economy. So if you want to comment on that, fine. You've got 2 seconds left.
Thank you very much, Congressman. First, I want to thank you for your leadership on the Great American Outdoors Act. Second, the department and the president recognize the importance of critical minerals. And yes, we have to have development. And as you said, it needs to be environmentally responsible. We need to have an eye toward protecting workers and all of those issues that we know we're good at. So so I'd love to visit with you more, and our door will be open. So look forward to further conversations about it, and happy to go into detail on the record.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Pleased to recognize Representative Lee for her 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank you and the Ranking Member Joyce for this hearing, and it's an honor to be with my former colleague, Deb Holland, as the Secretary of the Interior. It's great to see you again, and thank you and Ms. Taylor for being here today. As you know, over 80% of my home state of Nevada is federal land. This is the highest proportion in the nation. And of that land, the vast majority of it is managed by the Bureau of Land Management. And the budget request submitted today mentions rebuilding the core functions and the capacity at the Department of Interior as a top priority. But more specifically, the prior administration's move to move the BLM headquarters from Washington, D.C. to Grand Junction resulted in the loss of 287 out of 328 headquarter employees. That's an 87% loss of staff, significant loss of institutional memory and experience for the Bureau. Secretary Holland, are you able to provide an update on the current number of vacancies, both at the BLM headquarters and at field offices around the country?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. And so, yes, close to 300 positions were impacted during that move. And we know that it was, it was an upset there. And first of all, I should also say that in light of that, 90% of those positions for BLM were actually outside of DC. So, so we know that that it has been an issue. We're assessing the impacts to the structural changes that were made to BLM. And I want you to know that since I've been here, career staff have been a priority for me. Their morale, making sure that we express our appreciation. We have an amazing team of professionals here at the department. And, we'll identify those positions. Actually, less than half of the positions of the 300 were vacated, and some remain vacant to this day. So we're working on rectifying that, the institutional memory and experience losses. And just know that it is a priority for us, especially during this time of drought and all the climate change and all the other issues that are happening specifically across the West. So we've had a town hall already with BLM employees. I am committed to treating them with respect, and we're happy to continue this conversation with you as we move forward and make the changes that we need.
Thank you. Yeah, this is an incredibly important issue in my home state, given that BLM sort of is the gatekeeper for any type of land use decisions being made there. So appreciate the focus on that. During your hearing, your confirmation hearing, you said that you were examining whether or not to move the headquarters back to DC. Have you developed any criteria to facilitate your decision on facilitate that decision?
We are still gathering information currently, Congresswoman, and when we begin to, answer those hard questions, we'll absolutely loop you in on those decisions as they're being made. It was sort of an upset when they moved across the country, and the last thing we want to do is cause that again. So we're being very careful about how we're approaching it, but certainly the first step was ensuring that we're communicating with the career staff to assess how they feel about it, and we'll get some of that information in soon, and certainly be in touch with you about that.
Great, thank you. Just one other thing, that as you know, the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act, it's also called SNPLMA in its short form, has been a success story of federal-state collaboration on land use management. Since its inception in 1998, SNPLMA has generated $4.1 billion for the preservation, acquisition, and maintenance of precious federal lands in Nevada. It has been responsible for protecting lands around Red Rock Canyon, creating visitor-friendly walking trails in our wilderness area, and providing critical capital improvements. Can you commit to keeping the SNPLMA fund dedicated as a special account in the Treasury? And can you speak to your expectation on the next opening of the next round of money?
I appreciate that question. I will absolutely include this in our, I don't know the exact details, but we're happy to provide you with that as soon in the record. We appreciate your leadership on this issue. It's working, and so I don't intend to, upset anything that's working. So we appreciate that, and we'll provide more details as we move forward.
Thank you, and I'm over my time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Pleased to recognize Mr. Stewart for 5 minutes for his question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Madam Secretary, again, thank you for being with us. Thanks for your leadership. We're proud and want to support you. Thank you for coming out to Utah last week. It was great to see you in one of the most beautiful parts of our nation. And thank you for your commitment to working with the delegation and with the governor's office as you look at the monuments. We appreciated your time there. Very quickly, I know that Ms. Lee has concerns, or at least I suppose she does, based on our question about the location of the BLM headquarters. And I would just add very quickly that, my view, and I think this is, I'm not the only one who feels this way, but I think the BLM is best served when the leadership is living in the location of which they have great responsibility. And we think there's real advantages in having that leadership out west, as they have such stewardship over enormous swaths of land in the west, as you know from your own state, and has already been expressed for Nevada and Utah as well. One thing I want to mention, and I'm not going to have a question, at least not directly, but just to give you some background. When I came to Congress, I didn't know that I'd become involved with the wild horse and burros as much as I have. I have become kind of the horse guy, among other things, and I'm a little bit of a one-trick pony on this, if you will, in the sense that, no pun intended, by the way, it's just, this has become very important. And Secretary, I know that you know this because Nevada has a huge problem with overpopulation of horses. We've got, we think 80,000 of these animals out on the range. The range is designed to support, or able to support, about 27,000. We know the number this year is going to be over 100,000 wild horses, and that doesn't include the 35,000 or so that are kept in pastures. And I wish I could show you this coalition that we've put together over the last 5 years. I want to read you just a few of them. Humane Society, the Return of Freedom Wild Horse Conservation, the National Horse and Bureau Management Group, the National Cattlemen's, American Mustang, National Farm Bureau. I mean, we have got an incredibly diverse coalition here of people who have decided there's one thing we hold in common, and that is we love these animals and we want to protect them. And to starve them to death on the range is not compassionate, nor is it humane. And we, after an intense effort, got $35 million from Department of Interior, BLM, last year to actually fix this problem. We're hoping for $50 million this year, and I would just ask briefly if you'd be willing to support that budget request and help us with actually fix this problem on the range with our wild horses and burros.
Congressman, thank you. And thank you again for your hospitality when I was in Utah. I really want to thank this subcommittee for the leadership on this issue. I know that so many of you care deeply about this. We are also, just so you know, we're in agreement with the plan of the previous administration. We know that there's not enough habitat for that many animals when they're sharing it with many, many other species. And so we're going to absolutely let the science guide us, as well as, understanding the ecological impacts to the animals, to all the animals. So thank you. Yeah. We will absolutely be in touch with you. Know that it's a priority for us as it is for you.
Thank you, Secretary. I really appreciate that. And I'm going to mention one other thing and then ask one more question. And the 30 by 30 rule, I mean, that scares the life out of those of us from the West. Again, Madam Secretary, as I know you'll appreciate, coming from the West. And our fear is it's 440 million acres in the next 10 years. And if history proves, any guide, we know that much of that land is going to be taken from the West. And again, I'm not going to ask a question. I'd like to hit one other topic, but just ask for your consideration of the disproportionate effect that has on Western states. One final question, if I could, Madam Secretary, and you're aware in the 116th Congress, we passed a great piece of legislation named after someone that I think we both admire, the John D. Dingell Conservation Management and Recreation Act. To review what it does, it sets forth so you have an expanded access of opportunities for hunting, recreational shooting, fishing, the things that we enjoy who live in the West. Please share with us, if you would, how the President's FY22 budget demonstrates his commitment to this bipartisan and important piece of legislation. How can we assure that legislation will be implemented And it's historic and again, bipartisan, but it's no good unless it's implemented. Could you share how that your administration or the president's administration will do that?
Well, first of all, I'll just say that we are absolutely in support of outdoor recreation of that nature. I'm from New Mexico. I'm from a Pueblo household. I understand that, and we want to absolutely support it. I would really love to just give Rachel Taylor an opportunity to provide some details on this, if I may.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and thank you so much for the question. I think the importance of the legislation passed through the Dingle Act and other major pieces of legislation like the Great American Outdoors Act speak to the need of the department to balance multiple equities when it's allocating funds. And that includes the recreation access that the Secretary mentioned, the respect for hunting and angling, the importance of access for backcountry, for all kinds of important work to be outside. We're going to be looking at our land acquisition budget, and the Secretary will be submitting that as part of the President's budget request that would include both federal land acquisition and investments for states. So I think we're very excited to be able to tell us a bigger story when the President submits his budget, and expect to be back with you to fill in some of the details very soon. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Taylor, thank you. And my time's expired, but Secretary, whether New Mexico or Utah, Nevada, I mean, the Western states, we have much in common, much the same concerns. We look forward to working with you, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Mr. Harder, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Chair, for holding this hearing, and thank you to Secretary Holland for attending. I can't tell you how much it warms my heart to see you sitting in that chair. We miss you in the House, but I'm so excited to see your work in your new role. I want to focus on the importance of water storage across the Western United States, especially in a year like this one when we're dealing with the drought. The last 7 years are the 7 hottest years on record for California. Many of our reservoirs are currently below historical averages due to a lack of strong winter storms, and below average snowpack at only 61% of the historical average in the Sierra Nevada mountains. According to the U.S. Drought Monitor, 77% of California, including Stanislaus and San Joaquin counties that I represent, are experiencing severe drought, where conditions expect a fire season that is longer and more intense, increased water and decreased river flows, impacting reservoir capacities. The reality is, drought is here. We no longer have the option of preparing for it. We must address it. And in the boom and bust cycle of water, the best way to prepare for the dry years, like this one, is to store water in the wet years. In my district, we have a particularly important water project, which was authorized in the WIN Act, the Del Puerto Canyon Reservoir, as well as the conveyance project that is also essential. It's my top priority in office to help advance these desperately needed projects. So Secretary Holland, I'd love to hear from you. How will your department's budget support investments in water infrastructure, especially in water storage in the Western U.S.?
Thank you so much, Congressman. And yes, this is an important issue for us too, and we recognize that this drought year is like no other. There's just not enough water to go around, and so I appreciate I understand that you championed the science initiative on snowpack measurement to better predict these water supplies. That's very important, and I feel like all of us need to work together, and we are happy to take your ideas and see how we can work with them. I know that, I mean, what we're trying to do right now is to coordinate, right? It's going to take a lot of coordination. We're in close touch with states, Western states, regarding the drought and water issues. And I'd be so happy to provide details on this issue at a later time on the record, and certainly want to continue to have conversations about your ideas and how we can better prepare for when we don't have water.
Thank you. Well, I understand the purpose of this hearing is to discuss the FY22 budget. I want to register my strong interest in the department's submission of storage projects and their respective funding levels in when. Do you have a sense of how your recommendations differ from the previous administrations, and when do you expect to submit those recommendations?
Thank you so much. As Rachel mentioned earlier, the president's budget details are not quite out yet, but they will be very soon. And as soon as they are out, you'll absolutely know about those, and we appreciate all of your support on those issues. I mean, I believe very strongly that President Biden is working in his request to have an eye for not only for the future, but I mean, as we sort of mentioned earlier in some of the comments earlier, we have to do catch up on a lot of things. And not only that, but climate change it's wreaking havoc in so many areas on wildlife habitats and everything imaginable. So I look forward to submitting that full budget when the time comes, and know that the issues that you have mentioned today are issues that we care about as well, and look forward to working with you as time goes on.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that. I will just say in closing that I really look forward to following up to briefing you on two projects that are very critical to my district, the Del Puerto Canyon project, as well as the Patterson Conveyance project. I think those will go a long way towards helping us mitigate some of the drought conditions that we are facing in California. And I look forward to working with your office and hope that they are reflected in the budget submissions. Thank you so much for coming. It's so great to see you. And with that, yield back to Chair Pingree.
Thank you for your questions, Mr. Harder. I'm going to recognize Mr. Amadei, and I see the full committee chair has joined us, and we will go to Representative DeLauro after Mr. Amadei. So, Mr. Amadei, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good to see you, Madam Secretary. Look forward to working with you. And as we discussed yesterday, got some areas that I want to kind of go through your liaison and talk with you directly about that are kind of major jurisdictional areas. So I'd kind of like to just say, the first one, my request is that we make the Bureau of Indian Affairs realty operations a secretarial priority. And you say, well, what are you saying? We have been working at it for a while to cure the situation where members of tribes are given property, and then it takes years, and I'm not talking 2 or 3, for that to grind through the BIA realty process so those people can treat the property as their own. For instance, if they want to build a house on that property, to get a loan, they have to prove that they own it. And that requires action from BIA's realty division. I will just say that in preparation for this, our experience has been that is a subject which needs secretarial authority so that Native American people who are granted property through the appropriate processes actually get the title, in some cases, sooner than a decade and beyond. So I'll leave it at that for that. Also, I want to follow up on my colleague from Nevada's discussion about personnel, and that is it's kind of a ground level operations thing, but quite frankly, realty staffing at BLM is something that needs some attention from your incoming director in terms of just keeping existing slots filled so that they can process in accordance with whatever the applicable rules and regulations are, requests and those sort of actions, which quite frankly, and I know COVID's had an effect on that. So but when the positions are empty and you have a state, for instance, like Nevada, which is one of the most urbanized states in the nation, your Las Vegas district office and your Carson City district office's realty sections are kind of busy places to work. And so when there are slots, and it's not like you just go out and hire somebody, it takes a while to bring those people on and train them. Anyhow, that's another area that's in need of pretty constant, or it needs some attention where it hasn't had it perhaps in the past. And that's not your state directors or your district managers' fault. I think they need some more tools to do that, which also brings us to my colleague, Congresswoman Lee's comments. The previous administration, when it comes to the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act, had a habit of sweeping the SNPLMA accounts for purposes of budget submission. So Ms. Taylor might want to take a note of this. It would sure be nice, since it's against the current law to do so, if this administration did not do what the last administration did, which is, at least on a budget submittal, in order to make the budget balance, they swept the SNPLMA BLM interior accounts for purposes of balancing them. Also, there's been much talk about abandoned mines, which is a legitimate thing. I would hope that when that subject comes to Nevada, that perhaps you take a scalpel instead of something larger, and might even use that as a model, because quite frankly, we've had a very successful program in Nevada. And so I would submit, it ain't broke. It's been supported by the industry, and the state is working well. So I would ask that before we write a prescription for Nevada and public lands, that we probably ought to take a close look at what the patient really looks like in Nevada. And then finally, on the issue of fuels, everybody talks about fuels, which they should. And even in Nevada, where a lot of people go, well, you know, you're a little short on trees there. Even the sagebrush steppe ecosystem is at least a 50-year ecosystem, which it takes to regenerate after it's been burned. So when we talk about endangered species and habitat loss and stuff like that, it's no secret to anybody that it's been a pretty tough neighborhood in the Great Basin in general with wildfires lately. And so I think to concentrate on restoration of those lands, because it's a long process, but we need to start talking about how we put those lands back in the inventory, if you will. And then that has an impact on what we're doing for our ecosystems for endangered species. All of these things are things that I appreciate your gracious offer to take up with with you, not on committee time. And so I'll look forward to that. We'll be reaching out to you on those various topics to schedule those. And thank you for your graciousness in the offer. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Amadei. We'll now recognize the full committee chair, Representative DeLauro. Chair DeLauro, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you to you, Chair Pingree, and to the ranking member Joyce. And what music to our ears. Madam Secretary Holland, how wonderful it is to welcome you to the Appropriations Committee. And we're all so excited about your historic nomination, 54th Secretary of the Interior, and really your passion on so many issues, you know, honoring the commitment to tribal nations, looking at global climate change, resiliency to our country's food system. What a pleasure it was to work with you in the House, and I treasure that friendship and look forward to continuing our work together in the administration. I'm going to try to get in 2 questions. The testimony talked about an additional $550 million included for discretionary requests for tackling climate change, our nation's public lands. The department manages 500 million acres, 1/5 of our country's total lands. Given the scale of that, particularly interested in how we can better utilize the lands in the fight against climate change as crucial carbon sinks. In what ways is the department working to increase the ability of public lands to naturally sequester carbon from the atmosphere? And then my second question would be, where is the greatest need, and in what ways can the Congress and the committee provide the resources and investments necessary to support our tribal communities and help them rebuild from the pandemic? Brookings Institution recently found that the COVID-19 age-adjusted death rate among racial and ethnic groups was highest for Native people. So those are my questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and it's wonderful to see you as well, even if it's virtually. So, I mean, we know that we need to accelerate clean energy deployment, and we're working on that with respect to addressing climate impacts on public lands. And, you know, if we have healthy ecosystems, that's the best way to tackle so many of these crises that we're dealing with, right? Habitat loss to the loss of species and drought issues and all of those things. So we feel very, very confident that with a budget that can help us to achieve those goals, we can absolutely, you know, sort of unleash science in our department and make sure that the career staff who are here, who have been trained to do that work, have the opportunities to just get out there and do everything that they need to. I also, I appreciate you championing Native American issues in everything that you do. I've always appreciated that, and we're so grateful. You probably know that President Biden is committed to Indian country, and with respect to COVID, wants to make sure that tribes have what they need. One of the big issues with this administration is ensuring that broadband internet service is actually a reality to these communities. I know you know that there are some tribal governments who are still using dial-up because they don't have broadband. Imagine that if our government had to use dial-up in the work that we do every day. So, you know, with broadband, that gives tribes opportunities, yes, to run their governments effectively. For children in tribal communities to have opportunities for education, because we know that they didn't have those opportunities during the pandemic in many cases. Imagine if rural tribal communities had opportunities for telehealth. What a difference that would have made in the ways that they suffered through this pandemic. I also am proud of, and I'll just say quickly that the president's priority for Indian country has helped tribes across the country to lead in vaccinations across their communities. And as you know, the president feels that when we're a healthy country again, that we'll be able to address every other issue that is important to us. And so I appreciate your questions. And I would really, I don't know how much time we have left, but if I can defer to Rachel very quickly, she might have a few details to add. And thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I think you hit the high points, but I would just like to emphasize with respect to your question about carbon sequestration. The Secretary mentioned that the investments that we have in the budget request for science are top of mind for the department, and I would emphasize that we are very focused on science-driven conservation. So when we talk about going into ecosystems and landscapes and making sure we are doing the most effective work on the ground, we need the science and the data collection and the resources to back that up and make the best decisions. And so we're very proud of the investments, not just in conservation, but also in science put forward by the president. Thank you.
Thank you. And my time has run out, and I'm going to dash back to the Labor HHS subcommittee, which I chair. But I want to again welcome you, Madam Secretary. And I'm sorry to go over my time, and I want to say a thank you to the chair of the Interior Committee, Congresswoman Pingree and Ranking Member Joyce. Thank you very, very much, and look forward to working with you.
Thank you for joining us, Chair DeLauro. I'm pleased to yield 5 minutes to Chair McCollum, who I think is probably also in 2 or 3 other hearings at the same time. So thank you for joining us.
Just one other one, but this is a very important hearing, Madam Chair. Secretary Holland, you know, I'm absolutely thrilled that you're here with us today in your new role leading the Department of the Interior. And I am so excited about the opportunity of working with you in this new direction that President Biden has moved us forward on, because we share these priorities, including honoring our trust and treaty responsibilities in Indian country, the conservation of our public lands and ecosystems, and the science-based approach to addressing climate change. And I was so pleased to see that President Biden proposed an additional $200 million for climate science in the U.S. Geological Survey. This is a dramatic change from the previous administration, when I had to fight for attempts to slash climate change research, including the new Midwest Climate Adaptation Science Center. After years of delay, I'm grateful to see the USGS is finally accepting applications for that center, which will be vital for our understanding, so we can protect our regions, the Great Lake regions, fresh water, and other resources that we are facing during an ever-changing climate. I'm also looking forward to working with you closely to better the fulfillment obligations of our federal government to provide health, safety, and education and well-being for our Native American brothers and sisters. This is a profound responsibility that our nation has failed to meet. Your leadership hails a new era of government-to relationships with tribal nations. You have the hopes of all of Indian country resting on your shoulders. And I hope you know that you have nonpartisan allies in this subcommittee who are shouldering that responsibility alongside you, and look forward to working with you. In addition to increasing DOI's tribal programs, I would like to work with you on legislation that we'll be reintroducing with advanced appropriations for the Bureau of Indian Health Services, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the Bureau of Indian Education. It's wonderful to see that the president's budget will include a request for advanced appropriations for IHS, but I would like to know what more you're going to be doing in your agency to prepare the same option for BIA and BIE schools. So you mentioned broadband. I think it'd be helpful for the committee to know either now or later if there are other areas that this committee doesn't have direct responsibility for, but that are severely impacted in our ability to move forward, like broadband, which is in other committees, so that we can work with you to inform our colleagues of those interconnections in order for Native American programs to be successful. I want to take a second to just follow up with the discussion I had with Cabinet Secretary Vilsack last week on the protection of the priceless reserve of clean water, which is in our nation's most visited wilderness area, the Boundary Waters. The Trump administration, as you're well aware of, took multiple actions that placed the watershed in the BCA area at risk of pollution from toxic copper sulfide ore mining. Secretary Vilsack confirmed to me that the USDA is working with the Department of Interior to review past administration actions and consider next steps. I know you cannot comment on that, but I didn't want this opportunity to go forward without me bringing it up with you. So, Madam Secretary, if you could, things that we can work together to build on the ability to take the success Indian country has shown in COVID when given the resources to improve the health and well-being of its community, and what we can do more to support the future of our country, Native American children attending our schools. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair McCollum, and thank you for always for being a champion of Indian country. I'm so grateful and was always proud to work with you on these issues. So the president, of course, understands this responsibility. He understands the trust and treaty obligations of the federal government and is working very hard to make those reality. Tribal consultation, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be critical in moving forward to make sure we are capturing what we need to do. The president includes strides for the Indian Health Service, and even though that's not under our purview, we feel and he feels that the all-of-government approach is going to be critical to moving Indian country forward as well. I appreciate you for everything that you mentioned here today. We are going to look at all those issues. We want to work with you moving forward. We will take your ideas and be happy to to support the issues that that we know will help Indian country. So thank you so much. With respect to BIE schools, we're especially grateful for the Great American Outdoors Act for their part in helping to make those schools viable places of learning for children across the country, and happy to provide any details on any issue that you would like moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Miigwech.
Thank you, Chair McComb. I see we've been joined by Chair Cartwright. You might have 5 minutes to ask your questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Secretary Holland, for appearing before the committee today. It's a pleasure to see you. We miss you in the House. Look, from managing national parks, reclaiming abandoned mines, working with tribal communities, and protecting endangered species, the Department of Interior impacts my constituents on a daily basis. My district is home to the Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area, which last year saw over 4 million visitors last year alone, placing it among the top 10 most visited parks in the country. We're also home to over 300 of the thousands of abandoned mines that desperately need remediation. President Biden, I'm so thankful for him highlighting this need in both his skinny budget and the American Jobs Plan. I recently reintroduced 2 bipartisan, bicameral abandoned mine focused bills, one to extend the Abandoned Mine Land Trust Fund for another 15 years, and second, the Reclaim Act, to accelerate the spending of the AML, Abandoned Mine Land Funds, to reclaim abandoned mines faster and spur economic development. There's no reason to wait. The need is there now, and the money is there now. These are bills that are soon to be marked up by the Natural Resources Committee, a committee I believe you are somewhat familiar with, Madam Secretary. Reclaim also passed out of the full House last year, you'll remember, as part of a larger package, but was dropped in conference, unfortunately. With pressing reclamation needs across the country and the AML fee set to expire on September 1st of this year, passing these bills and focusing on reclamation is an urgent priority, and I am glad the President's budget reflects this reality. These abandoned mines pose a serious risk to the health of our constituents, to our environment. They impede economic development. Parts of the Susquehanna and Lackawanna rivers are stained orange from the iron oxide in abandoned mine drainage. The towns of Nanticoke, Sawyersville, and the areas surrounding Hazleton, Pennsylvania, have to deal with abandoned mine issues on a daily basis. Coal refuse leaks, harmful chemicals like arsenic, lead, and mercury, they go into the surrounding land and the surrounding water. The Office of Surface Mining Reclamation and Enforcement estimates it'll cost at least $10 billion to reclaim the remaining high-priority abandoned mines across the country. As I discuss these issues, I also have to remember the greatest champion I know for abandoned mine issues, my friend Louise Dunlap, who passed away a few days ago. Louise was a pioneering environmental advocate, a good friend, and an inspiring force for everybody who knew her and worked with her. My team and I are deeply saddened by her passing this week. She continued engaging with us and building support for our legislation up until her final days, fighting for this cause as she fought for her life. She'll be deeply missed, not only as an advocate, but as a friend as well. Madam Secretary, my question is, what were the long-term impacts on the ability of the Office of Surface Mining Reclamation and Enforcement to address the huge demand for reclamation projects if SMCRA, SMCRA, and the AML Trust Fund are allowed to expire? Would it even be possible to remediate all of the priority 1 sites defined as protection of public health, safety, and property from extreme danger of adverse effects of coal mining if AML is not reauthorized? What's going to happen, Madam Secretary, if you don't do these things?
Congressman, thank you so much for the question. Let me first offer my condolences for the loss of your dear friend and champion. I'm sorry for that loss. Building capacity is job one for us. And of course, I have mentioned this before, that extending the AML program is a priority for me. It's a priority for the president, and along with the funding in the budget and the American Jobs Plan. So I thank you so much for your leadership on this issue, on the abandoned mine lands issue. Your constituents deserve to have clean water, clean land, clean air. We all deserve that. And so I really feel like we can support each other on this issue, and hopefully see a brighter future, and not one where we're struggling to get by. So I'm happy to talk with you more about this, and do whatever we can to help with you on the funding and the reauthorization.
Well, thank you, Madam Secretary. It's a comfort to have a cabinet official of your expertise weigh in on these questions, and I appreciate the budget's reflection of abandoned mine lands. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chair Cartwright. I'm pleased to see Chair Capter, and happy to recognize you for 5 minutes for your questions.
Chair, and I apologize to you and members and the witnesses. We had a concurrent defense hearing this morning, which I had to attend, and I want to say to Secretary Haaland, we are just so proud of you. I almost forgot to get my questions just because I'm just so thrilled to see you in your position. Obviously, I come from a part of the country where we have a lot of fresh water in the Great Lakes, and for many years have had a bill called America's First Frontier, the Northwest Territory. I would like to send the Secretary information on that. The Cuyahoga River at the eastern end of my district used to be the boundary of the western United States. But as the nation expanded after the original colonies, there's not much interpretation for the next rung of settlement. So, for example, when we commemorated the War of 1812 and what's called the Battle of Lake Erie, I had to fight like the Dickens to try to get Native Americans included in the program. The Department of Interior told me that it really wasn't proper because we had no tribal lands in Ohio. But I said, I represent Lake Erie. I represent Cuyahoga County. I represent Ottawa County. I have the Maumee River. We have Seneca County. There's a history here that is untold. And so my first question really, we have powwows in our region, thousands of people come to, and the tribes were pushed west. Well, that's a part of our history. Why can't we commemorate that? And I just want to present that to you as a challenge I've had in my own career, and would very much appreciate the help of the Department of Interior in reviewing my bill, America's First Frontier, and trying to enhance departmental interpretation across our region, starting at the Cuyahoga Valley National Recreation Area, one of the most visited parks in the country, one of the top 10, but then extending across the coast and away over to Minnesota, all of the states that were a part of the Northwest Territory. So I don't expect you to say, Madam Secretary, that you will absolutely do it, but I would just tell you the difficulty in getting the Park Service to work with the federal wildlife refuges that exist across our fresh lake system is really hard. And I think that there's the opportunity for enhanced interpretation there. So that's one issue. The second issue I wanted to bring up with the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Climate Corps, I'm struggling because I represent heavily urbanized communities. And I'm worried that the CCC, whatever it is, will focus and bring volunteers from rural areas, and that whatever they'll do will be important in planting trees and so forth and retrofitting relative to climate change, but that the cities, the people that live in the cities, won't be encouraged to become members. And that if they do, they'll be shipped out to Denali, and they won't work in areas like ours, where just in Ohio and Michigan, we have to replant 20 million trees because of the emerald ash borer and the Asian longhorn beetle and the destruction of our cover Cleveland, Ohio used to be known as the forest city. It is no more because we've got high asthma rates. We've got issues all along the lakes related to urbanization and neglect and poverty. And so I just wanted to say that I would hope that perhaps in your work, you and Secretary Fudge over at HUD and Secretary Granholm might have a good cup of coffee together someday and think about what all this means for regions like I represent. Again, you don't have to comment. I'll send you a note on that. Just wanted to tell you that at a place called the Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge and the Cedar Point National Refuge, we've had historic visitation levels, 360,000 visitors. And this is really exciting for us. When I was first elected, we had about 4,000 acres that were federal wildlife refuge. We now have over 10,000. And birding has become a major tourist draw across our region. We're so proud of that. On Mother's Day, people come from all over the world. And I would love to meet with you at some point and some of your staff to think about regions like this and how we can enhance environmental tourism for economic growth. So those are issues I wish to bring to the table, and we'll send you more. And if you wish to comment, I just have a few minutes left in my time, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And everything you mentioned, I care about. So thank you so much. I'm happy to work with you and take a look at your legislation for the Americans' First Frontier. And thank you for thinking of that. Yes, there were people here on this continent before our country was the United States. So thank you for recognizing that and feeling that it's important enough to create legislation over. Just quickly, the Civilian Climate Corps, it's important everywhere, every single place in our country, and absolutely includes urban and suburban areas. That's where we need more trees. That's where we need to pay attention to parks and make sure that kids have places to go where they can recreate. So I'm happy to just be in touch with you. Feel free. We'll reach out to you. You can reach out to us, and we're more than happy to continue this conversation. And I thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Capter, for joining us today and for your great questions. We've completed one round of questions, and we're going to go for two. I don't know how many members will be able to participate, but thank you, Madam Secretary, for sticking with us here. I will recognize myself for the first 5 minutes. I want to just bring up again something that's actually been discussed a little bit, but I'm just so pleased to have both of you there. And if you want to weigh in on this anymore, and this is really about this war on science. Having been on this committee for the last 4 years, I can't really describe it in any other way except a certain level of disdain and discrediting of science. We've seen it in our budget requests in the past 4 years, reductions in science funding, elimination of significant climate change and conservation science programs. So we're so pleased to see the president's budget proposing over $4 billion across multiple agencies, including the Department of Interior, and specifically the support for science at the USGS and other bureaus by investing another $200 million to obtain information about the impacts of climate change and how best to implement mitigation, adaptation, and resilience efforts. I know, as I said, this came up earlier, and I think Deputy Assistant Taylor talked about it a little bit, but can you elaborate on more, or should we wait till we have the full budget about how you'll allocate this additional funding, for what purposes you'll use it, and also the steps you see yourself taking to elevate science and its importance as a foundational, a foundational way to inform our decisions going forward?
Thank you. I'd like to, I'm going to ask Rachel to provide some details as well, but what I'll say is, I had a meeting with some folks from the USGS the other day, and we just talked about unleashing science, right? Unleash science. That's what the scientists are here to do. And we have to give them the opportunity to put all of their experience, knowledge, and passion into this moment in our country. when we have an opportunity to do so much, and we need that because we know climate change, we're on a precipice, and it's going to take all of us to work together to pull us back from that. So I'd really love to give Rachel an opportunity to provide a few details. And of course, this is not our last conversation. I want to speak with you more and more about this and appreciate your passion about this, Chairwoman. Rachel?
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and thank you so much, Madam Chair, for the question. As we said earlier, I think the details for the budget, when it's released, will promote a more detailed conversation. But I think investing in the scientific capacity at the agency, which the subcommittee has also championed, is a huge priority of this budget. And you can imagine that to get into the effective climate change policies that the department will need to do, we're going to have better tools at our disposal. And that's going to include modeling, that's going to include satellite technology, that's going to include things like better hydrology information. We have to have stream gauges. We're going to have different tools to model potential future impacts of climate science. So exactly how the funds will be allocated, we'll be more than happy to follow up with the subcommittee once the budget is out. But as I said earlier, I think we feel really good already at the story that the president's budget is telling on the importance of science in land management responsibilities. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both for that. And I just can't say how excited I am to be able to discuss science again, to look at actual data and the importance of retrieving the data that's been lost, continuing to preserve important information, because we just can't make good decisions without adequate science. I only have a minute, but just quickly, the National Park System, we're so excited about the Great American Outdoors Act. We had an opportunity to talk to the Chief of the Forest Service, and she talked to us about some of the positive impacts. And for all of us who have parks in our home states, deferred maintenance is really a significant issue. But there are a lot of critically important projects that don't fit under the deferred maintenance umbrella. And I think some of those may be possible under the American Jobs Plan. So do you want to just quickly touch on where you see the opportunities there to put our important national parks whole again, make them whole again?
Thank you, Chairwoman. And once again, I am going to thank the committee so much for enacting the Great American Outdoors Act. It was something I was, of course, proud to support when I was there. And we need that, absolutely, to reduce our deferred maintenance backlog. What's not covered, essentially, deferred maintenance in bureaus outside the scope of the Great American Outdoors Act, including the BIA and USGS. And we've heard where those shortfalls are now, and we'll work to move those forward. And basically, projects that don't primarily address deferred maintenance, it leaves out infrastructures associated with relatively new designated areas. So that leaves a lot. That leaves a lot of space for us to move those other funds into creating the best possible public lands that we can have.
Great. Well, thank you. We're going to look forward to working with you on that. My time is long overdue, and I'll recognize Ranking Member Joyce for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Secretary Holland, as I mentioned earlier, that I see my dear friend Marcy Captor on here, and together the Great Lakes are especially vital to both of our districts, and we've fought together for them for a long time. The lakes are the largest freshwater system in the world, providing drinking water for 48 million people and generating more than 1.5 million jobs and $60 billion in wages annually. Given the environmental and economic importance of the Great Lakes, I've made it, and together we've made it a top priority to fight for their protection in Congress. That's why I was pleased to see the administration's infrastructure plan recognize the need to invest in the protection and restoration of major water resources like the Great Lakes, in the continuing work to prevent the spread of invasive carp, harmful algal blooms, and why it's important for the long-term health and economic vitality of the Great Lakes ecosystem. I'm interested in, does the FY22 request support ongoing Great Lakes restoration program that your bureaus including Fish and Wildlife and the U.S. Geological Survey, are carrying out in partnership with the EPA through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative?
Yes, the Great Lakes remain an extremely important issue to all of us here at the department, and really happy to make sure that we're continuing our conversations about this issue. Yes, invasive carp is an issue. We appreciate the partnership and really want to make sure that that we continue conversations. When the budget actually comes out, we'll contact you. We can talk about more details then, but absolutely will want to include your priorities for this area. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm the nice guy. You do not want to incur the wrath of my friend Marcy Captor, because she will make sure you understand the priority. Secretary, as I mentioned in my opening, market-driven development of energy and mineral resources on federal lands and waters remains essential to our nation's security, our economy, and a smooth transition to a clean energy future. I'm deeply concerned that the president's so-called pause on new oil and gas, natural gas leases on public lands and waters may be the first step of a larger strategy to price domestic fossil energy out of the market and force Americans to pay for less reliable, less secure, and less clean sources of energy, as well as, and I know my colleague, Ms. McCullum, had brought up the interest that she had in a project with a company up in her district. I want to know if, as you review these, whether we're going to do so in an open and transparent way so we can have buy-in from everyone and get input. I'm not saying that you necessarily would be against it. I'm just saying as a whole, whether or not we can have that. And could you update us on what your department's comprehensive review and reconsideration of oil and gas permitting and leasing, and what changes you're looking at and why, and the transparency that will be used in that process?
Thank you, Ranking Member. And of course, energy independence is absolutely important. It's a priority of the president. As you know, the leasing pause only paused new leases. Existing leases were not paused at all. And in fact, permitting continues right now in this department. So folks have, our department is signing off on permits regularly. So want you to know that that industry continues to roll. The energy review is still ongoing, and we have been taking input from diverse stakeholders. We'll continue to take input from diverse stakeholders, and if you were, in fact, we would be happy to sit down with you and talk more about this if you would like. But we had a gas and oil forum last month. We're reaching out to various states and communities across the country to make sure that we're capturing everyone's input into this important issue. The review, we want to make sure that it's complete. We want to make sure that it's done correctly, and just know that we know and believe that the fossil fuel industry will continue for years to come. It's not going to get shut off like a faucet. So we thank you and for bringing this up, and of course always welcome your input into this important issue.
Thank you very much. And as you can see, once again, Madam Chair, I'm right there at my 5-minute timeline for you. So I can't give you any time back. Thank you.
It's truly brilliant how you're able to do that down to the last second. I don't know that any of us could achieve that as well as you do. Pleased to recognize Representative Kilmer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Madam Secretary, I wanted to start where I ended in the first round, which is discussing some of the tribes around the country, but certainly in my region, that are in the process of trying to move to higher ground because of persistent challenges related to climate change. And to some degree, I guess I want to use my time to ask for your partnership. I am hoping that something can be done in a more comprehensive way for tribes in these circumstances, because right now it is nearly impossible for tribes to piece together the resources to fund everything from water systems to fire halls to new housing to you name it. And, to the credit of this subcommittee, I was very grateful that our Chair McCollum and Ranking Member Joyce visited our region. We heard from one of the leaders of the Quinault Indian Nation who said, when I was a kid, the ocean was a football field's length away from our village, and now it's our front porch. And every time we have a severe storm, our community is below sea level, and it just fills up like a bowl. We heard from a leader from the Ho tribe who said they were able to build a new fire hall, and former Chair McCollum asked what resources were made available and did the federal government help? And they said, well, we don't have water yet at the fire hall, but the federal government helped provide body bags. And it just strikes me we need to do better than that. And I'd love to get a sense from you of, one, I would just obviously appreciate your partnership. Two, I would gleefully invite you out to the region to see for yourself some of these challenges. And three, would just love a sense from you of whether a roadmap can be provided to these communities that desperately need the federal government to step up to its obligations in a way that it hasn't so far.
Thank you, Congressman. And of course, the minute I can get out to see you, I would love to come, and would consider it an honor to meet with the tribes in your state, in your district. And my goodness, thank you for raising those issues. Indian country is a priority for us. It's a priority for the president. I just want you to know that I feel like it is a new era. This administration has committed to that partnership with tribes and committed to living up to our trust and treaty obligations. And I feel very confident about the team I'm on right here at the department. Everybody here is committed to that charge. And I just know that with your partnership and that of this subcommittee, the full committee, and so many dedicated members of Congress right there in a bipartisan manner. I was proud in my time there that Indian issues were everybody always rallied around to do the right thing. And so we'll continue to just make sure that we're all working together. I want you have my commitment for that. And I'm not sure if Rachel would like to add any details.
I think you addressed the situation well. I mean, I appreciate the question from the congressman. I mean, there's no doubt that tribes are being impacted by the effects of climate change in addition to other capacity issues. And I think to the secretary's point, this administration is totally committed to looking at all programs, and so that would include building capacity more generally as well as addressing the climate crisis. And so I think when you see our budget request, we'll be able to have a more fulsome discussion, but we're looking forward and all committed to a person at the department. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. I'm pleased to recognize Mr. Simpson for 5 minutes if he has a question.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I just had to leave for a second from the hearing because we were doing a press conference on a bill that Senator Bennett and Representative Crow and I just introduced called the Outdoor Restoration for Partnership Act, which will help restore some of our forest lands and other lands that have been destroyed by wildfires. And I think it will help the Department of Interior greatly in this. But I hope that the Secretary would take a look at this. It was just being introduced. And as I said, we just had a press conference on it. But as has been mentioned by both you, Secretary, and others, the bipartisan Great American Outdoors Act was signed into law last year. And with it came resources to address our public land maintenance backlog, as well as permanent funding for the LWCF. Can you give us an update on the rollout of the Great American Outdoors Act and what we can expect to see, and how the projects funded by the LWCF and other things will be rolled out so that we can see exactly what we're funding now with the Great American Outdoors Act?
Thank you so much, and I, I'll continue to thank you all so much for making sure that we have those resources at hand to do the work we need. I would love to just pivot to Rachel because she has all the details in front of her, and of course, many more conversations to be had, and always welcome your input, Congressman. Rachel.
Thank you so much for the question. The department is fully committed to implementing the act and working with Congress to make sure that it's done the right way, that it's done effectively, and that we're making the progress that the investments demand, because this was a huge trust placed in the department and the Forest Service to do this work. With respect to the fiscal year 2021 projects, the ones that were articulated in the Interior bill last year, the projects are moving forward. There is a full list of both the deferred maintenance projects and the Land and Water Conservation Fund projects available on the department's website, and we are committed to transparency and to providing Congress with regular updates on the progress that we're making. With respect to the fiscal year 2022 budget, we would expect that the full budget request, when it's delivered by the president, would include the detailed information on projects and where they will be. And then at that point, we're happy to engage the subcommittee and have further discussions on how the bill will be implemented as part of the fiscal year 22 appropriations process. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that response. As you know, a lot of people look at the Great American Outdoors Act as just funding LWCF on a permanent basis and full funding for it. But one of the really important aspects of it to me was addressing the backlog of maintenance that we have in our national parks. Everybody knows that's been to our national parks knows that we love them to death. And they're really facing some backlog of maintenance in these national parks. And we need to do a better job as this pandemic has hit. More and more people are discovering America where they're not traveling abroad and so forth. And I think you're going to see vast increases in the numbers that go to our national parks. As I understand it, RVs are the #1 selling item in terms of vehicles and stuff, because people have decided that they want to see America again, and that's going to put pressure on our national parks and other public lands. And we need to make sure that we can address this backlog of maintenance. So I appreciate the work you're doing on that. Look forward to working with you on it as we see how this is going to be implemented, because it was passed with a great deal of hope, and I think it's our job to make sure that we fulfill those hopes. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Mr. Cartwright, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Secretary, I do have some more questions for you. We were talking about abandoned mine lands before, and we are incredibly excited in Pennsylvania that both your budget and the American Jobs Plan proposes significant increases in funding for AML projects. And we want to get to work right away. So the first question I have in this round is, what support will you give to the states to ensure that they have the administrative resources to get this money allocated quickly and efficiently?
Well, of course, we're always happy to work with the states, and we'll just do whatever it takes, Congressman. I'll be honest with you. And we'd love to meet with you more on this issue. If you have ideas, if there's something that's important to you, we would like to hear about it.
Secretary Holland, this is Matt Cartwright here, and I know how to take yes for an answer. Next question is, how will your department balance the allocation of these funds and resources between certified and uncertified states and tribes? And how will you balance environmental remediation and economic development?
Congressman, if it's okay, I would love to take this question and answer it in detail for the record. We'd be happy to do that. And if that's all right with you, that's what we'll do.
Perfect. I want to bounce over to national parks. We touched on that earlier. Over the past year, citizens in my district and those in surrounding communities have flocked to the Delaware Water Gap, very much along the lines that Mr. Simpson was just talking about. People want to get out. They want to see the country. And they've gone to the Delaware Water Gap more than ever, more than usual, with nearly 1 million more visitors in 2020 than in 2019, largely due to COVID restrictions for other activities. So as you know, for over a decade, there's been consistently a roughly $12 billion repair backlog at our national parks. Now, much of this backlog is tied to aging infrastructure, as many of the buildings, roads, and bridges were built in the 30s and the 50s and the 60s, and obviously they now need repair and renovation. The Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area alone faces $63 million in deferred maintenance costs. Implementation of the Great American Outdoors Act, which Mr. Simpson was talking about, will help provide funding to start addressing many of these maintenance and repair concerns. So the Delaware Water Gap, the past month has already shown some improvement with a new Watergate Wetlands Restoration Project and a bridge and culvert repair project on US Route 209. Question is, how is the department beginning to put the Great American Outdoors Act into action to address this backlog? And how are they leveraging other agencies and other funding streams to aid in overcoming what is really a mountainous backlog?
Thank you. That's a definitely good way to describe it, a mountainous backlog. And I mean, yes, we are working hard to have a list of priorities for this issue, and it sounds like the Delaware Water Gap is definitely a priority for you. We know that the Great American Outdoors Act covers a really large portion of backlog, but of course we still need strong regular maintenance budgets to make sure that we can take care of it all. And actually, if we are able to prevent some things, that that helps it from turning into a backlog issue. So we're working on this. We have there are tools we're using to gauge the projects and whether they should fall into a list of priorities, and certainly willing and happy to speak with you further on the priorities that you have. We know that these backlog issues are important, especially in light of the fact that, yes, more people are visiting our open spaces, and that's a good thing. So
terrific. Thank you, Secretary. Last question. What preventative measures is the National Park Service taking to prevent a growing backlog developing in the future and nip it in the bud and get to the root causes of the backlog?
Of course. And this hearing today is actually one of the best tools that we have to nip some of those things in the bud. That's making sure that we have a very strong budget to address the issues ongoing.
Well, I thank you, Secretary Holland, and I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. I don't see Mr. Amadeus, so I will yield to Ms. Capter, Chair Capter, for 5 minutes for her question.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just wanted to go back again, and I will follow up with a letter urging the Secretary to think about the CCC and which instrumentalities will be used to link to our urban communities. I think there's an opportunity to do phenomenal work with our urban park systems, our metro park systems, even engaging some of our National Guard transport companies, because they have trucks and they can haul dirt and they can haul stone. They can do a lot of things establishing relationships across government to make the CCC work in urban areas, particularly those that are noted for having high incidences of poverty. And in those neighborhoods, I can guarantee you the tree cover is quite limited. And we have to pay attention, partnering with many of our urban healthcare systems. They are very, very worried about pulmonary issues. And I think whether you're talking Milwaukee, Detroit, Cleveland, Toledo, we have quite a few communities in the Great Lakes that could use that kind of cross-government partnership. I know President Obama tried that during his career, and in some cases it worked, in some cases it didn't. But I think with the Department of Interior, we have a real opportunity. And I wanted to thank Congressman Joyce, someone I have such great respect for, the work that we do together on the Great Lakes. We should have named them the Great Seas, because if you emptied out Lake Superior, it would cover both North and South America 1 foot high. Most of our membership does not understand how vast the Great Lakes really are, and many of the enormous challenges we face there right now. So I would just say to the Secretary, I'll reiterate my plea for greater cooperation between the National Park Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service, and working with us across the Great Lakes to have an interpretation that is worthy of their history. That does not exist within the Park Service now, nor within, obviously, the Fish and Wildlife Service. They're a little bit of a different, but in our region, it's what we have. So we have to use what we have. I think I represent the second smallest national park at Perry's Victory Memorial. So we don't have a huge park system that attends to Lake Erie, but we do have the Cuyahoga Valley National Recreation Area, which is our anchor. So I just wanted to point out the sort of the Great Lakes got shortchanged in the past by the Department of Interior, and we can do so much better. And I know with Congressman Joyce in position as a ranking member working together, we can figure this out. Finally, I wanted to just mention the World War II Memorial. I worked for 16 years from the original introduction to its construction, and we are now minting coins. We've got a coin bill to raise additional money working with the Friends of the World War II Memorial. But the part of the memorial that remains incomplete, we wanted to explain the why of the war. And I was very afraid to turn the memorial from the American Battle Monuments Commission over to the Department of Interior, because I didn't see the Department of Interior as having kind of historical underpinning that was necessary. If one looks at the memorial at Normandy in France that was built by our country, we can bring some of those collections back virtually and even on site. And again, this is a long conversation, but I really think it's the second most popular memorial in the country. And so we could do a lot to teach the younger generation that doesn't even know that World War II occurred and what the Transatlantic Alliance is, and the sacrifices that were made for us to be able to have a free nation ourselves, despite all of our challenges. But I think the World War II Memorial Site could do a little bit better job on historical interpretation of why we fought that war and the sacrifices attendant to it, because people do leave the site, and if they don't really understand what it was about, they like the beauty of it, but they don't understand the history. And for future generations, I think it's really an imperative that we do that. I hope I haven't run over my time, Madam Chair. I don't see the clock on my screen here. So I don't know if the Secretary would want to comment on any of those points, but I look forward to, again, sending a letter and kind of going through some of this so it's completely clear.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and we will welcome your letter and any future conversations. I just want you to know that the Civilian Climate Corps, we're working on a report right now to the President regarding that issue and the program that we want to start. And we're looking at leveraging many existing programs. And I know there are a lot of organizations that will want to help out with this. And also you might know that President Biden has made environmental justice a hallmark of his administration. That means that we want to include underrepresented communities, poor communities, neighborhoods that haven't had opportunities to to get out and be a part of something like the Civilian Climate Corps. So we're going to do everything we can to engage those communities every step of the way. And so thank you so much for caring about all of these issues, for your thoughtfulness, and we really do look forward to continuing our conversations with you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Capter. I feel confident between your involvement in the committee and Ranking Member Joyce, we will be reminded of the importance of the Great Lakes. And I do think it's very important that you continue to do that for us, because those of us who represent ocean coastal districts often forget about the vast presence of the Great Lakes and the significant role that they play. So thank you for that. Thank you so much, Secretary Holland and Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Taylor. It's really been a pleasure to have you before our committee today. We appreciate your testimony, your answers to our questions. We look forward to partnering with you with the full budget and the many challenges that we have before us, but we know we're going to work with a great team at Interior. And assuming there are no additional questions, the hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.